And tonight we are going to be making carnita bowls, kind of like the bowls that you can get from Chipotle. And then we're going to start prepping some sourdough loaves for tomorrow to bake up. We're going to be making our regular one, and then we're going to make a Parmesan oregano bowl. So we're going to start with those so we can get our stretches in. And we're going to start by adding 100 grams of active starter to each one of our bowls. During our lunch, when we were streaming during lunch, we fed our starter right over here, and it has already bloomed up and is extra big. It actually got so much it touched my cheesecloth, so I'm going to have to watch that. But this is what an active starter looks like. It's very bubbly and it really puffed up. So we're going to add 100 grams of active starter to our bowl. Now, I always recommend you feed it 4 to 6 hours beforehand so you know it's really good. And let's see. Oh, that's 70, almost there. Just about. Okay, so we've got 100 grams in this bowl. And then we're going to do 100 grams here. And I always do 2 loaves at a time. We're a big family. So we feed about 9 people every single night. We have 5 kids and then my parents. So we go through a lot of bread. And I always do 1 regular one and then 1 bougie bread, as my husband calls it. Okay, so we've got 100 grams of active starter in each one. And now we're going to add 375 grams of warm water. You want to use warm water because it really helps the flour hydrate faster and easier. And 375 grams is about 1.5 cups. But when I'm doing my sourdough, I always like to use my scale. It always turns out right when I use my scale. If I don't, it doesn't always turn out right. So we got 375 on that one, and we're going to do 375 in this bowl. Get my scale back to 0. And almost. Okay. And now I'm going to use my dough whisk, and I'm just going to give each bowl a little stir just to kind of dilute our starter. That way it mixes up evenly into our bowl. And for this, we are prepping our 2 sourdough loaves for tomorrow that we can bake up. We're going to do our traditional, and then we're going to do a Parmesan oregano roll. And then for tonight, we're going to do carnita bowls. So I've got my pork in my Instapot cooking. Okay, we're going to add in 2 teaspoons of salt to each bowl. It's about 10 grams of salt if you want to use your scale, but I kind of just eyeball it with my hands. I think this needs a little more. And then we are going to add 500 grams of 500 grams of flour to each one. I'm using unbleached bread flour. Do not add 500 grams of salt. It will be awful. So 500 grams of unbleached bread flour, and that is about 3 cups. And we're going to be adding that to each one of our bowls, and we're going to start out with our base being the same, and then during our stretch and fold we'll add in our other spices for our bougie one. Okay, we've got 500 grams here. Now we're going to do 500 more grams. And you want to use unbleached bread flour. When flour is bleached, it kind of kills off all of those good enzymes that help with the fermentation process for sourdough. So I always use unbleached in everything. And then here is our 500. We're done with our scale. Move this out of the way, and then we're going to use our dough whisk to incorporate. So If you are in your sourdough journey yet and you haven't gotten a dough whisk, do it. It just makes mixing it up so much easier because with a regular spoon, the dough all clings to the basin of the spoon, while the dough whisk, it helps like pass it through really nicely and it's super easy to incorporate. Okay, so my first loaf right here. It always looks sticky in the beginning, but by the time you're done with everything, it will be a perfect looking loaf. So here's our first stir of that one. We're going to mix this and then we're going to cook our dinner and then we'll do our stretch and fold and add our yummy herbs and cheese to our bougie loaf.
You have a question. I'm not sure exactly what they're asking, but I think they're asking if you use regular flour or bread flour.
I use bread flour in it. I use unbleached bread flour because it has more gluten in it than regular flour, like all-purpose flour, which lends to just a nicer bread. Now, you can technically use regular, like all-purpose flour if you wanted to or if you were in a pinch, but it's just not going to have quite as nice of a texture to it because it doesn't have as much gluten, and gluten gives you that nice elasticity in your bread. Instead of a like a really crumbly bread. Okay, so we've got our 2 sourdough loaves, kind of started prep. We're gonna let these sit and the flour hydrate. Then we will add our oregano and Parmesan to one, and we'll do our stretch and fold. But now let's start prepping up dinner. Okay, we're gonna start out with prepping up our vegetables for our kind of like our fajita vegetables that you have. Like when you go to Chipotle, they give you, like you can choose fajita vegetables, which are just chopped up peppers and onions. So I'm gonna slice up these peppers that I have and some onions so we can saute them in our pan. And then we'll make our yummy rice and guacamole, corn salsa, tomato salsa, and our beans for tonight's dinner. So it's essentially like a copycat version of Chipotle. My kids love Chipotle. We all love it, but every time we go to Chipotle, because there's so many of us, it costs like $120 by the time it's all said and done. So I can make it healthier and cheaper at home and more. So we do that, just kind of makes it a little bit more affordable. And, you know, makes the kids happy. It's a meal that they all kind of love. And there's especially like different parts of it. Okay, pop my four out here and then we'll slice these up. These will be for our fajita veggies. And if you are cutting through your peppers and you find that your knife is sliding on the skin, that means your knife's a bit dull and you just need to sharpen it up. So you just get a honing steel out and you can just sharpen that and it will be cutting like new in no time. I find I have to sharpen my knives about every 2 weeks or so just to keep them up to the like where I like them. I find whenever I go to my parents' house and I have to use their cooking supplies, every one of their knives are dull, and I'm like there, and I'm like, let me sharpen up every single knife. Okay, we got my skillet turned on, and I put about a tablespoon of olive oil in there. Now we're gonna chop up an onion. I'm gonna use the rest of this yellow onion that we had from the other day, and then I'll use a little bit of this white onion because I'm gonna be using the white onion in my salsa and my corn salsa. And while I normally don't like to use white onion for sauteing because it's just not as sweet and as nice for sauteing, I have a lot of it, and so I just don't want it to go to waste. So we'll take a little of that in here as well. So I'm just going to cut through, and we're going to cut off the edges, and then we're going to peel off the outer layer of our onion.
You have a question? How many are you cooking for tonight?
We are cooking for 7 tonight. And then any leftovers I'll just give to my parents. They, a lot of times, they love our leftovers. They'll pick it up. My parents are really, really busy. And so I kind of cook for them most meals and just kind of help them out. They're they're big academics, and I feel like they love their job. And you know, this just helps them out, especially because they help us with our kids and everything like that. So it's a one way that I can help them out. And a thank you for them for all the help they've given us throughout the time. So I've got my skillet up nice and warm. We're going to add our onions and our peppers, and we're going to start sauteing them in our olive oil. Perfect. Lovely. And then I'm going to get a little bit of water to put in this pan because we're going to heat up some water, add some bouillon and a bay leaf, and get that ready for our rice in just a second. Okay, we don't need much water for it because I am using frozen rice. I really love frozen rice. It's so much better than any of the rice I make. Like you can get like frozen sticky rice, and it's just like the best. Now it does cost more than regular rice, but I love it. So we're gonna put in some chicken broth so we can season our rice, give it a little bit of flavor. Because I find like Chipotle's rice is just so delicious. So we're just gonna give it a little bit of chicken, a spoonful. It's about, I would say, 2 teaspoons. And then mix it into the water I put in here. We're gonna let that simmer up. I'm gonna kind of season this water, and then we'll throw in our sticky rice. And that will just give it a nice little flavor. So I've got a bay leaf here. We'll do 2 bay leaves. And we're gonna let them simmer in this water as well. And we're gonna put in a little bit of dried oregano. Perfect. And this is gonna be really great flavoring on the rice because their rice always has such a great flavor to it. And then mix up, trying to get this to dissolve. Okay, we'll let that heat up, and then we'll add our rice in just a second. I'm gonna get some tongs out so I can toss my peppers real quick. My peppers and my onions, and then we're gonna start prepping our sides, our salsas. So we're gonna do guacamole, tomato salsa, and a corn salsa. Kind of the 3 things that I always get when we go to Chipotle. I said, you know, the beauty is everything at Chipotle is pretty much really easy to be made at home for a fraction of the cost. So I always say, I'm like, oh, I can do that at home, and we can have just as good of a meal, feeds more for a fraction of the cost. And it's actually, you know, I can get this meal done in like no time. So right now I'm gonna mince up this white onion. White onions are great in Mexican food for salsas, and because they just have a really nice taste. They're most ideal for it. So these will be lovely, giving them a nice chop. And perfect. And then I'm going to divide these up for my corn salsa. And this one's going to be for my tomato salsa. And then our guacamole, we're just really going to do a smashed guac. Beautiful. Let's turn my pan down here low because we really want those herbs to flavor that water. Okay. Let's do our green onions for our corn salsa. So I'm going to kind of cut off these white tips here because they're a bit more fragrant. And then I'm going to cut off the very tips of these because they're a little bit chewy. And we're going to give this a nice mince. And this is going to go in our corn salsa, which we're going to be using frozen corn that has kind of thawed out. So it's brought up to room temperature. There we go. And perfect. I'm going to toss these kind of thicker parts in our broth over here. Give it a nice little oniony flavor as well. And then these smaller parts will go in here for our corn salsa. Now, we're going to prep our tomatoes. So I've got 3 vine-ripe tomatoes here. I'm going to start out, whoa, I'm going to just kind of take out this core. I'm just sticking my knife in, sliding it around. There we go. Until we've got the core out, because that is just going to be hard and chewy, and it does not taste good in our salsa. And we'll get this guy in here and cut out. I did earlier today around I want to say it was around 4 o'clock, in my Instapot, I added in a pork butt roast with some chipotle seasoning, cumin, chili powder, chicken broth, liquid smoke, bay leaf, and oregano, and a little bit of garlic salt. And that has been cooking on the high pressure setting for the last, I would say, 3 hours, so that it will be nice and tender, and then I'll be able to shred it easily for our carnitas. There we go. So I've got my first tomato chopped up. And now we're going to do my second one. If you like heat, you could use a jalapeno or poblano pepper. We are kind of spice babies here. We do not like things super spicy, so we are kind of just stick with our plain, tomato, garlic, salt, cilantro, lime. But if you are a heat lover, just mince up 1 jalapeno or 1 poblano. If you're using those peppers, just be careful of the seeds. The seeds are the spiciest part. They carry most of the capsaicin. So they can pack a punch, and just make sure you always wash your hands after cutting them up, because you don't want to accidentally rub your eye with pepper juice on it. I've done that before, and boy, does it burn. Okay. Get this one chopped up, and we'll add it in here. I just realized I put my tomatoes for my corn salsa, so we're just going to have to move these because I saved my green onions. That's okay. Luckily, the flavor profiles go all really well together, so it's fine. And perfect. Give these a nice chop. You could also, I'm using vine-ripe tomatoes, but you could use plum tomatoes, work well with this as well. And in a pinch, you could use a cherry or grape tomato. You just have to kind of quarter them. So it just take a little bit more time. Okay, got that. Let me give these a quick toss. Always an escapee. Good, we're getting this nice little browning on ours. We're trying to get that fajita sear on our peppers. And then, let's see. We've got our bag. This is a bag of frozen corn that we just kind of let come to room temperature. This is going to be for our corn salsa. So it's just a small 10-ounce bag. You don't need much. Now let's get our avocados kind of prepped, and then we'll finish up all of our things. I feel like when you're cutting into all avocados, it's like Russian roulette. You never know if you're going to have a perfect one or if there's going to be a hidden bruise you don't know about. And, they go bad so quickly. I always, you buy them from the store and they're completely unripe. So you have to let them sit out on your counter for a couple of days so that they ripen up, because they just never ripen up in the fridge right. But if you forget about them for just a day or a couple of hours, then they're bad and then they're not good to pop in the fridge. So I typically will put them in until I got a squeeze on them, and then they go in the fridge until I'm ready to use them, because it slows down the ripening process. Okay. Let me get a spoon to scoop out our avocado. So, now these are good ones. This kind of pops right off. So we'll take it. We're going to put these in there, and then I'll mash them with my fork. We'll add some fresh lime juice to all 3 of them. We'll add lime juice to our salsa, corn salsa, tomato salsa, and to our guacamole. For the guacamole, the lime juice will help it stay, prevent it from going brown. It just slows the oxidation process down. But for the other two, it just gives a really lovely flavor profile. And there we go. So we've got all of those. Turn this down just a pinch. We're going to give this a quick toss. And before we finish up those, we're going to get our beans going and we're going to get our rice going. So I'm going to be using a can of seasoned black beans. These are already pre-cooked, so they're really not much to do. I'm going to add a little bit more seasoning to them because I do feel like they're a little bit mild. And I'm going to keep them in their sauce since it is a seasoned sauce. So I'm just going to add these to my pan over here. And we're going to turn our heat on low. Wrong one. And then I'm going to add a little bit of Mexican Fiesta seasoning. I get this from Whole Foods, but it just has chilies, tomato, and cumin in it. So just a nice, just has chilies, tomato, and cumin in it. So just a nice, kind of robust Mexican flavor. So we're going to add about half a teaspoon of that with some oregano. About a half a teaspoon of oregano and a splash of garlic salt. And these will just season these up nicely. And let me get a spoon to stir it. And we're going to just let these simmer in those flavors. Just gives it a little bit more of a kick than just the plain canned beans, but they don't need much to jazz them up. Okay, this is the white sticky rice I was telling you about. I just get it in the freezer section right next to like the Chinese food. They have it, right there. It's just, I find it just comes out really, really nice. It's frozen, but we'll heat it up real quick. I use this when I'm making my fried rice too, or really any herb rice. It's so much nicer. It's so soft and fluffy. It's a good quality rice. And it's a bit easier. You don't have to wait 30 minutes for your rice to cook and all of that jazz. So since we're feeding a big family, we're using 2. But I will say a good amount comes in here. 1 bag would easily feed a family of 4. Okay, I'm going to turn up my burner just a little bit. And I'm going to take this and we're going to spread it into that herby broth that we had at the bottom. And that's why I said you don't need too much liquid because this is already cooked, but just enough to give it a really nice flavor profile. Because when you think about it, when you get a bowl from like a Mexican place, the rice is always so delicious. Okay, we've got that stirring and we're going to let that cook and warm up. Let's check these one more time right here. Beautiful. They've got that nice kind of skillet look to them, so I'm going to kind of turn them off. And then I'm going to give them a little shake of garlic salt. I always like to give my seasonings at very end because sometimes it will stick to the bottom of your pan and burn. So just a little sprinkle. You don't need much because they're going to shine on their own. Now let's get to finishing up our salsas. And dinner will almost be ready. Okay. We need to get some cilantro. I'm just going to pick up a big chunk of it because we're going to use this in our tomato salsa, our corn salsa, and a little bit in our rice. I'm going to give it a nice wash real quick. Hey, Bruni. And then squeeze out this excess water. And we're going to mince it up nice and fine. So I'm just going to go over it, putting a lot of pressure coming down on it. If you do not like cilantro, you can skip it. A lot of people find that cilantro has a little bit of a dish soap taste. I will find that in the summer when I pick my cilantro right away and use it, it has even less of that taste. It's not as noticeable. But the longer after you use cilantro after it's picked, the enzyme in it that gives it that taste definitely blooms a little bit more and is a little bit more powerful. So super fresh cilantro minimizes that. Okay. We've got our cilantro in here. I'm going to put just a little bit in our rice. And then we're going to have some go in our corn salsa and some go in our tomato salsa. And here, splash more in our rice. Now, time. And here, splash more in our rice. Now, time. So when you're like picking out a good lime, you want one that has a little bit of a heft or a squeeze behind it. But also, I find if you can find one that has like a thinner skin, it's going to be more juicy than a lime that has a thick skin. Same with like all citrus fruits. The thicker the skin on it, typically the more dried out it's going to be. So we're going to use 1 whole lime in our guacamole. Get all of the good juice out. And you've got to use fresh lime. You can't use any of that like true lime or whatnot. It's not as good. We're going to use some lime in our corn salsa. And get in there. We're going to use some lime in our tomato salsa. Now in the tomato salsa, you could use lime or a little bit of vinegar. Like a splash of balsamic vinegar also works great to give you that kind of tanginess in your salsa. Let me stir this rice real quick. And you can see it's all starting to get nice and soft and steamy. Beautiful. And perfect. I'm going to just turn it down a little bit. And the trick is just keep it into big piles. It will steam up without kind of burning on the bottom. Now we need to add a little bit of garlic salt to each one of these as their saltiness flavor. So a little shake, and a little shake. And then we're going to start by mashing up our avocados. When we were in Mexico we had like a stop in Mexico for our cruise. I think it was Cozumel. We had the best guacamole there at one of the resorts where we went to swim with dolphins, and it was so good. And I have tried to replicate it, but I think the part that made it so good was the avocados were just so fresh. I mean, they made it right at our table for us, but I think getting like tree ripe avocados is just, can't beat it. Okay, so we've got our guacamole. Now you could always add in diced onions, peppers, and tomatoes if you want. My kids kind of like it more plain, so we just really do kind of a guacamole smash. Perfect. And then we're going to stir up our corn salsa. Perfect. So kind of just like what you see when they get the corn salsa at Chipotle. And then here would be like their pico de gallo, like their mild salsa. Get those onions mixed in. But really, you know, just to spice it up, just add in a jalapeno or poblano, and you've got a little kick in there. But we like it mild. Let me get some spoons for those. This can be for the guac. For these. Now we need to check on our meat, and then it'll be time to do our last little fold and serve, and dinner will be ready. Look, our rice is now perfect. Our beans are nice and warm, and we have our lovely meat. So let me get a trivet to pull that out so it's easier to work with. This is our Instapot. We had our, we put our pork butt roast in, and then I had a few pork chops that I needed to use up. So I threw those in there as well. And I'm going to get a tong out, but it was just on high. And look, the meat is just falling apart. So I'm going to break it apart and toss it in these juices. You want to make sure when you're doing like a carnitas is that you really season what it's being cooked in. So this was, we used some bay leaves, some chipotle seasoning, chicken broth, liquid smoke, Worcestershire sauce, oregano, that Mexican fiesta seasoning, and a little bit of garlic salt. But this will be just lovely and beautifully flavored. So I'm going to show you guys how we are going to serve up dinner tonight. We got my rice off, got my beans off. And we're going to be doing it in a bowl because it's our Chipotle bowl. So we're going to start with our rice. Get a nice little, kind of just like, you know, when you're at the restaurant. We'll get our serving of beans. Not all my kids like beans, so that's why we only do a little bit. Then we have our carnitas. Beautiful. And our fajita vegetables. Tomato salsa. Corn salsa. And you cannot beat guacamole right on top. And the way we like to eat it is with some tortilla chips. So you kind of eat the bowl with the tortilla chips, but it is excellent and delicious and a fraction of the cost of what you would pay for Chipotle. Well, before we finish, let's finish up our sourdough bread. This will take us less than 2 or 3 minutes. So our regular one, we're just going to do our stretch and fold. So stretch, fold, stretch, fold, stretch, fold. And we're going to do this again in 30 minutes and then 30 minutes and then one more time, and then we're done. Now for our Parmesan and oregano, we're going to add about a cup of Parmesan cheese. I'm just going to eyeball it with my hands. Okay, into our things. And then we're going to add a nice serving of oregano. So I'm using about a tablespoon of dried oregano. And then I do have a few bits of fresh oregano that I'm just going to toss in here. I don't have much. And then we're going to do the exact same thing where we're just going to fold this in. And then this bread will be ready for us to eat. Tomorrow night, we'll be able to bake it up. So let me do our fold and press. And this is really like important for developing the gluten and the elasticity in your bread to make sure you have a nice bread crumb, as they say, which is the texture of the inside. So we're just kind of stretching and fold. And again, we will do this again in 30 minutes, stretch and fold, and we do 3 more sets of it. Well, guys, that was dinner for tonight. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and please feel free to send us a message or a comment if you have any recipes you'd like us to try or any cooking questions. We'd love to try to help you answer those. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe.